Hello, beautiful people, Africans, Biafrans, lovers of freedom all over the world. You are welcome once again to Nelly's TV, where we give you the enlightenment you need in order to be yourself and not be manipulated by the powers that be. Today, we are going to be talking about how and why terrorism entered Nigeria and festered up to what we have, the scale we have it today. In one of my videos, I proved to us how Britain started terrorism in Nigeria by invading the territory by force, forcing their government on people, and at some point merging people who don't have any relationship, any resemblance, any common ideology or tradition together and calling them Nigeria. That was how Britain started terrorism. In an attempt to force people under their rulership, they really massacred a lot of people, villages, and communities without even minding. And today, they continue to claim to be saints, calling other people terrorists. Anybody who cares to speak up, they tag him a terrorist, but they are the real terrorists. Britain is the real terrorist that brought about terrorism in Nigeria, just as France is the terrorist that brought terrorism to all the French colonies in Africa. They are all terrorists. So they are evil people. But something happened because Britain didn't stop at what they did and just leave. When they were leaving, they left somebody or people that will continue their act of terrorism in Nigeria, and that is what has led to what we see today. So Britain is not innocent. Britain is complicit, and they are evil. They are evil. They will repeat. Okay, so what actually happened? Let us start. Britain started terrorizing the environment known as Nigeria from the southern part of Nigeria when it had not become Nigeria. Okay, so they started conquering people, occupying their spaces by force, harvesting their resources by force, and taking them away at little or no cost at all. That was what they were doing. Their aim was just to exert control over people and their resources. They were thieves, and they are still thieves till today. That's what they do in countries that don't have enough weapons to withstand them. Okay, so while they were doing that from the southern part of Nigeria, where is known today as Nigeria, something very terrible, also similar to what Britain was doing, was also happening at the current day northern part of Nigeria. So, but it wasn't Britain that was doing that, the one that was happening in the northern part of Nigeria yet. It was somebody else known as Usman Dan Fodio. So who was Usman Dan Fodio? We are going to see it right now. Look at your screen now, and you see that. Okay, let's go a bit down. Born in Gobi, Usman was a descendant of Turobe clans of urbanized ethnic Fulani people living in Hausa kingdoms since the early 1400s. In early life, Usman became well educated in Islamic studies, and soon he began to preach Sunni Islam throughout territories that would later become parts of independent Nigeria and Cameroon. Okay, so that was Usman Dan Fodio. Okay, He developed a critique of existing African Muslim elites for what he saw as their greed, paganism, violation of standards of Sharia. So he was all interested in imposing Sharia on people. Usman formed and began an Islamic religious and social revolution which spread from Gobir throughout modern Nigeria and Cameroon. This religion influenced other rebellions across West Africa and beyond. Rebellions, okay? So he was rebellious indeed. In 1803, he founded the Sokoto Caliphate, and his followers pledged allegiance to him as the commander of the faithful. Okay, then he went ahead. Usman declared jihad against the Hausa kings and defeated them. He came to a place and began to wage war against the kings that were already leading the people. Under Usman's leadership, the caliphate expanded into present-day Burkina Faso and so on and so forth. That was Usman Dan Fodio. Are you getting it? All right. So Usman Dan Fodio was a terrorist by himself. He was a terrorist. He lived in a town called Gobir, but soon began to radicalize people, and with them, he began to conquer the kings of Hausa community. Now, if we go ahead to see more about Usman Dan Fodio, let's look at this one. Let's concentrate here. Gobir was a traditional state in what is now Nigeria, founded by the Hausa in the 12th century. Gobi was one of the 7 original kingdoms of Hausa land and continued under Hausa rule for nearly 700 years. Its capital was the city of Akalawa. So for those of you from Nigeria, do you still hear anything called Gobir? No. Usman Dan Fodio conquered it, decimated it, and changed the name. Okay, so he was a terrorist. Let's continue. Who was Usman Dan Fodio? Look at him again, another story about him. Usman Dan Fodio, a Fulani Islamic scholar, conquered the Hausa land of Nigeria through a series of military campaigns known as jihad. So he declared jihad and began to massacre people. Known as jihad, starting in 1804, he aimed to reform the Hausa states, which he saw as corrupt and deviating from Islamic principles. Corrupt and deviating from Islamic principles. But in the first place, were Hausa people Muslims? Were Hausa people Muslims that he said that they were deviating from Islamic principles? Look at this. It is known that the first Hausa people were pagan, but Islam, perhaps filtering through traders, played an increasing role in society over time. The number of individuals who accepted Islam was probably small at first, and traditional religious beliefs and practices continued to exist. So they were traditional people. Hausa people were traditional people, they were not Muslims. They were forced into Islam by the criminality and jihad of Usman Dan Fodio when he conquered them and began to replace their kings with Fulani people. And I will show that to you. Here, you will see the jihad brought about significant religious and political changes, including the imposition of Islamic law and the replacement of Hausa rulers with Fulani emirs. So that was his aim. All these gymnastic of they were corrupt, they were this, they were deviating from Sharia was just to entrench Islamic law and put his people in positions of authority. That's why till today, there is no emir in the northern part of the contraction called Nigeria today that is an Hausa man. All of them are Fulanis. So when this thing was happening at the north, Britain was also coming from the south, conquering towards the north. And they were conquering. So we're going to look at how how long it took Britain to conquer the communities they met. In the southwestern part of Nigeria, which is otherwise known as Yoruba, the information here says that British didn't conquer the Yoruba land in a single swift move. The process of British colonial penetration and administration in the Yoruba region, which is now part of Nigeria, spanned several decades, roughly from the mid 19th century to the early 20th century. Okay, so Yoruba land was actually not specifically conquered like that, in a remarkable way, because Britain was living in Lagos, which is part of Yoruba land, and so there wasn't any need to conquer anywhere. So they were only expanding and moving, from one community to another, establishing their colonial offices. Then, when they went to the northern part of Nigeria, because they were looking for loyalists, they were looking for people who will be doing just anything they do with a snap of the finger, the people will do. They saw Yoruba as a bit easy to control. Yoruba was easy for them to control, so they were looking for a larger territory, and not only people who will obey them, but people who will be criminally minded, so that when they say go and massacre these people and put fear in them, terrorize them, and tell them to do what you want, and they do it, the people will quickly do it. So they went to the north and saw that Usman Dan Fodio was doing exactly what they were doing. They liked him. So what happened in the north? The British conquest of the Hausa land and surrounding areas, including the Fulani and Kanuri regions, primarily occurred between 1900 and 1903. So Usman Dan Fodio had already done a good work for them, putting fear into the hearts of Hausa people and other ethnic nationalities. So when Britain came, it was very easy for them to just take over. So it took them a few years to consolidate control and pacify the region with major military campaigns and resistance lasting until around 1907. So that was Britain for you. They used their evil company called Royal Niger Company to continue to establish their leadership offices, establish themselves in different territories in the space known as Nigeria today. Okay, so then the British launched military campaigns to conquer the Sokoto Caliphate and other areas with major battles like the Battle of Kano in 1903 and so on and so forth. They went as far as Middle Belt and all that. So these are the evil escapades and terrorism acts of Britain, but when they came to Igbo land, the story became a different thing. Look at what happened in Igbo land. The British pacification of Igbo land, which involved military expeditions and the establishment of colonial rule, took approximately 20 whole years. And that wasn't all. From 1900 to 1920, that was the specific period, but it still continued after this time. A key part of this period involved the Ekumeku movement, a resistance movement against British rule that lasted for 31 whole years, from 1833 to 1914. So this 1914 was the year Britain forced every of these ethnic nationalities in Nigeria to merge together, and they called them Nigeria. All right. So, and they began to rule from the central government, and that imposed their authority over everybody, every ethnic nationality. And that was how it looked like they conquered the Igbo land. Because here, read, the Kumeku movement, a significant resistance movement against British rule, lasted for 31 years. This movement involved stealth and guerrilla tactics and was a major challenge to British authority. That was even with their inferior weapons. They resisted Britain for 31 whole years. Even with the superior weapon that Britain had, they used their inferior weapon to resist them. That was what Igbo men were, Igbo society, Igbo people were those days. They were very determined. It's not like today where you have very greedy people who are just looking for positions of political authority to make money and take good care of themselves and their families. And whatever happens to every other person is none of their business. This is evil. That was not how Igbo people were. Igbos were very determined, and whenever they say we want to do this, they will do it with one mind, without having any saboteur among them. Now we have a lot of saboteurs, and a lot of them are in the political space, and that is why Igbos now have this height of problem. So we continue with the story. So when these things happen this way, Britain looked at it and said, "Oh, we have a set of people that are very, very stubborn here. They are called Igbos. And these people, we are not going to just allow them like that, because if we do, whatever we have worked for will go down the drain. So if we are to leave these people at any point in time, because they knew what they did was evil, it was invasion of people's territory. So they knew that a time will come and they will leave. So they plan to establish people who are as wicked as they are, who will continue to dominate the rest of the ethnic nationalities in the space called Nigeria today, more especially against the Igbos, because they saw Igbos as their biggest headache, as people who will not just take what they say for it, they will challenge them at any point in time. So in order to avoid that challenge and bring everybody under their easy control, they needed criminals like themselves. And Fulani was the choice criminal set of people whom they appointed. And this manifested in the very first census and election that took place in Nigeria. And when I say that, some people will say, "Are you sure?" Of course, I'm sure. I'm going to prove it to you just in a moment. All right. So they manipulated the census and election, very first ones of Nigeria. In the census, they claimed that the population of the northern part of Nigeria was more than the population of the southern part of Nigeria. It was a lie. They rigged it. They did it just to give the North an advantage, political advantage, so that anytime there is an election, somebody from the North will surely win. And up to today, Britain sits there to determine who rules Nigeria. And they are always from the North. And when they come from the North, they will make sure that the person is a heartless Fulani person, whom when they tell to terrorize people, more especially the Igbos, the person will do, because their plan is to always keep Igbos under subjection so that they will not challenge the evil enterprise they established before leaving. So Britain is still feeding from Nigeria as we speak. All right. So I'm going to prove this thing to you. Look at this. Look at this video here. I'm going to play it and you listen to for yourself. So these two persons here are a couple. This is the husband of this woman. This man was an officer, a labor officer under Britain, the colonial government of Britain in Nigeria. He lived in Lagos and worked there. So here he is here to make a confession to the fact that Britain was involved in the rigging of the very first election. So pay attention. He's not a Nigerian. He's British himself. His wife British as well. But they decided to say the truth because it's only the truth that will make you free. So listen.
Mr. Arrowsmith, you were featured in a program recently by BBC Radio 4
Yeah,
titled Document,
yeah,
and that was hosted by Mr. Mike Thompson.
yeah.
You were alleged that the British government rigged the first and most important election in the history of Nigeria in 1959 in favor of the North. Am I correct?
Did you hear that? He alleged that Britain rigged the very first election, and he asked him, "Am I correct?" Listen to his answer.
Yes. How long were you in Nigeria for?
From 1955 to 1960. And we were based...
Okay, let me see if he answered it.
Recently by BBC Radio 4,
Yes.
titled Document,
Yes.
and that was hosted by Mr. Mike Thompson.
Mhm.
You are alleged that the British government rigged the first and most important election in the history of Nigeria in 1959 in favor of the North. Am I correct?
Yes.
He said yes. Did you hear that?
How long were you in Nigeria for?
From 1955 to 1960. And we were based in Lagos. I was on the staff of the Department of Labour. I was largely occupied with employment problems, all the employment exchanges, and statistics and international reports, and was kept pretty busy. I was also stationed in Lagos in charge of the capital and the port. I was the port labour officer as well. And I also devised a port labour scheme and later a social security scheme, which was one of the first in Africa.
So you see, he wasn't just any kind of person. He was a labor officer that lived in Lagos. He was an insider in the colonial administration that rigged the election. You heard him say yes, that that it was rigged,
which guaranteed workers some income after they'd finished work. It was a providence scheme. As I say, it was called the National Providence Scheme, and I was very proud to have put that on the statute book.
I was going to ask you what your role is. You've mentioned three important. Is there any particular name given to your office while you were there?
Okay, let me move it a bit forward.
Also ich konnte durch die Zusammenarbeit mit Learning Suite einfach die
I'm
Kundenzufriedenheit
sorry,
enorm
I will
steigern. Meine
cut
Mitarbeiterin wird ultra
the advert so we can continue. Yeah. Just a moment, please. YouTube is doing their thing. So this gentleman here was trying to tell you that he wasn't an outsider, he was an insider. He knew what was going on, and it wasn't a joke. So what he said, he was very sure of it. Okay, very, very sure of it. So if it were an African, somebody will say, hey, he's just talking, he's just blabbing. Was he there? Is he sure of whatever? No, he's not an African. It is a British talking. Okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to pause the video here and continue the second part shortly. If you have watched up to this point, thank you very much. Please consider subscribing and then share the video and like it as well. I'll be right back in the part 2 of this very important video. Thank you.